Hello, my name's David Keeton. I'm a railway enthusiast and I'm giving a talk in Community and Local History series month for North Yorkshire County Council. And I'm going to give you a talk this evening on railways around Scarborough. It's a brief tour of the railways around Scarborough, many of which, but not all, are now closed. I'm going to take you on a little tour of the area and explain as we go along. There's a little bit of explanation about each railway before we actually have a look at some images of that railway. If you just like to imagine that you're actually travelling along those lines and perhaps think back to yesteryear when that was possible. Okay. From Scarborough, we do have the disadvantage that we can only sweep around 180 degrees as the North Sea lies to the east. And so the tour will actually start at Scarborough and initially we'll head up north up the coast, then right up to the Loftus area. And then we retrace our steps, sweep down across to the west, down to the East Riding and back home. So we're crossing a couple of borders there. I'm just showing you a little section of one of those lovely tiled maps. And if you can just see my cursor here, we're going to start at Scarborough. There's Scarborough, and we're going to wend our way up the coast. And we're going to go up towards Whitby via Ravenscar, Filing Hall, and Whitby. And Whitby will have a little diversion into the town, and then we're going to go right up to towards Loftus, past the Bulby Mine area. We come back now, and for the second part of our journey, we will go along the Forge Valley line, which headed really from Seymour towards Pickering, and then down towards Longclose line through to Rillington and Malton. And at Malton we'll do a reversal and head down on this line here, the Wolds line, the Malton and Driffield line, which went through the Wolds to Driffield, up towards Bridlington, and we will then return to Scarborough and the base there. Okay, so initially we head out towards Whitby and then just go over the border to Loftus into Cleveland. We then head to Seymour and turn west towards Pickering on the Forge Valley line, turning back to head south to Rillington and west to Malton, and then down to the Malton Driffield line, back home along the still happily open Hull to Scarborough route. And sadly, much of Rydale is now devoid of railways, so the history of which must, as they say, be left for another time, and some further reading suggested at the end of this talk. Scarborough, where we're going to start, was relatively small until the discovery of the springs, which were perceived as health-giving and attracted visitors needing health cures. However, the building of the York to Scarborough Railway, which was led by George Hudson and the York and North Midland Railway, led to a massive increase in visitors to Scarborough, and hence the prosperity of the town. The first train was formed of 35 coaches and took 3 hours from the journey from York to Scarborough, with stops at Castle Howard, Malton and Ganton, and that took place in 1845. In fact, the Scarborough Station that we know today was known as Central and at one time boasted 7 platforms, which was actually not able to cope with the tourist traffic. And so this led to the opening much later of the Lonsborough platform, which is out of the station, probably the better part of half a mile. And that opened in 1908 and closed in 1963. And the location of this, which was really on what we now call the Valley Bridge, the huge arch, railway arch over Valley Bridge. It was linked there because it was linked to the fact that the only space available for carriage sidings for all these excursion trains was not at Scarborough Station. There was no room left there. It was at Northstead. And this explains why there's still a large and wide open area of land on the course of the Whitby line there. This line from Scarborough to Whitby enters Scarborough through the 260-yard long Falsgrave Tunnel facing towards York, which was very inconvenient for Central. In fact, local Whitby trains had to reverse, having come out of that tunnel, into the Bay platform number 1A, which had been cut out of the very long platform 1, which is still in use today, very long, which has the recently restored longest platform bench in the country. And it's often used for specials, steam specials. After that, we head up the coast towards Whitby on the line completed in 1885, passing through the suburbs of Scarborough, past the site of Northstead carriage sidings, and then past Scorby, which was at that time a village at some distance from Scarborough. But this line, as with all those described, was single track with passing loops at most stations. After Scorby, we come to Cloughton and then Hayburn Wyke, which is the site of the only level crossing on the line, and incidentally the scene of the only fatal accident to non-rail users on the line as late as 1957. The hill climbing starts in earnest here, and the gradients up to Ravenscar are steep for a railway, being mainly at around 1 in 43. Ravenscar, as you may know, was to have been developed into town with the importance of Scarborough, and plots of land were sold but never developed. This accounts for the sizable station square, complete with a hotel-sized building. The station was at the summit of the line at 639 feet above sea level. The line immediately starts to drop on the even steeper gradient of 1 in 39 and enters the 279-yard Ravenscar or Peak Tunnel on a curve, which often caused problems for Scarborough-bound trains which were still climbing slowly there. Ironically, this tunnel need never have been built and was insisted on by the owner of Ravenhall, or Peak Hall as it was known at that time, a William Hammond of London, who, by the way, also insisted on the station being built. Just having a look at some of the images of the line that we've covered so far, this is an image a little bit scratchy, but it's looking towards Scarborough Central, and it's of the Lonsborough station with its main platform there for the guests and visitors from excursions dropping off there and being picked up. And this was opened, as I mentioned, in 1908. Some lovely pairs of signals, group of signals that you can see just there in the foreground. The lines that remain to York, Scarborough to York, are on the right-hand side. This is looking in the opposite direction. You can still see that the platform remains even if all the station buildings have disappeared. So you're now looking towards Weapon-S, and although these lines were well and truly greened and rusted over when this photograph was taken, the main line to York is seen as the pair of tracks to the left-hand side. This is a picture of Falsgrave Tunnel. And to the right, the tracks disappear off towards Scarborough Central Station. This locomotive is either coming out or heading towards the Falsgrave Tunnel, which curves very sharply under Falsgrave and emerges now completely hidden in what is Sainsbury's. And you can see that the line was facing the wrong way to go to Scarborough Central, and the platform 1A is just where you see really in front of the signal box there, which happily has been preserved as Falsgrave Box rather than being called Scarborough. This is afraid a low quality image, but it does at least show the how many carriage siding lines there were at Northstead. And if you imagine this today, you can see why it's a long, fairly wide green park. And this would be full on excursion days, full of carriages with often the locomotives that brought them in turned around and ready to head back to wherever they come from, as far afield as West Yorkshire and so on. This is Scorby Station in the 1950s. And if we did this would be a typical locomotive at the time, and probably an A8, which will be heading towards Scarborough there. Just out of sight are some camping coaches, and we'll come to those in a minute. Those are often very popular for holidays. Moving further up the line, we come to Hayburn Wyke, which, as I mentioned, was the site of the only fatal accident, of the level crossing, which is just behind the photographer here, and we're looking towards Ravenscar. A picture of a steam train heading Scarborough bound at Hayburn Wyke, just about to enter the platform there. And having climbed the gradients, we then come to Ravenscar Station, and this is looking north towards Whitby. As well as the station, you can see that there is a sizable building to the right, and this was really built as almost as a hotel. In fact, it was a hotel for the guests who never really arrived because Ravenscar never developed. Ravenhall remains the only hotel there. And we're actually looking at the summit of the line. The line drops towards Filing Hall and Robin Hood's Bay and affords a lovely view of the bay, as it is referred to locally, before climbing up again to Horsker on gradients of about 1 in 43 and dropping down to Whitby, crossing the River Esk on the 13 brick arch Larpool Viaduct, which stands at about 120 feet or 37 metres in metric above the river and is 305 yards long, 279 metres for those of you who are interested. Happily, this stretch can be enjoyed by walkers and cyclists alike. And if you are lucky, you will see a North Yorkshire Moors Railway train using the Esk Valley line well below the viaduct, so you can walk across the viaduct and see it. The convoluted development of the railways meant that Whitby had 2 stations. Whitby Town, the current one, convenient for the centre of town, and the somewhat less conveniently sited Westcliff on the Scarborough, Whitby and Middlesbrough route. In fact, after closure of the Whitby to Loftus section in May 1958, local trains using the Esk Valley route to and from Middlesbrough had to reverse twice at Westcliff and Whitby Town, climbing or descending the Bog Hall link on a gradient of 1 in 54 until the end of passenger services between Scarborough and Whitby on the 6th of March 1965. Whitby actually was really the first town that we'll talk about to actually receive a railway as part of the Whitby and Pickering Railway, and it was opened as early as 1936 as far as Gromont. Looking at some images here of the line there, Robin Hood's Bay. This is looking towards Whitby, and although the tracks probably through the station are more or less level, you can see that the line after the passing loop starts to climb steeply again towards Horsker. Another picture of Robin Hood's Bay with a southbound train, lovely little water tank there at the end, and some station furniture, Parcels Barrow. A little bit later, this photograph, this would be a diesel multiple unit. This time we're looking southwards, and it's passing a lovely old northeastern railway signal, a lower quadrant, and behind you can actually see some camping coaches used by holidaymakers. This is Larpool Viaduct at Whitby, and it does, although the housing has been developed near it, you can still walk across. There's still a very good view. It's surprising where this viaduct can be seen from different roads, and surprising where it's hidden from. You cannot actually see it from Whitby town at all. A picture here of Larpool Viaduct, looking probably roughly northeastish, and you can see there that a North Yorkshire Moors Railway steam train is progressing along the Esk Valley line towards Gromont. Now, the next station was the Whitby Westcliff Station, and this is where trains from Scarborough in the latter days would have to reverse when the line to the north of Whitby had been closed, and would have to head down towards Whitby town. The next section which we follow, as far as Loftus, was the part which would cause most of the engineering difficulties. It required the building of 5 wrought iron viaducts, most between Whitby and Sandsend, where the railway pass is closest to the sea. Sandsend, in common with many other stations along the line, possessed camping coaches which allowed affordable holidays when travel was mainly by rail and there were very few cars. North of Sandsend, 2 tunnels were built through headlands after the original sections of the line built around the cliff edge collapsed. The longest, Sandsend at 1,652 yards, can be accessed but is unstable and is closely followed by Kettleness Tunnel at 308 yards. It's rumoured that the engineering for the latter tunnel was so bad that the original headings, even in this short tunnel, missed each other completely. After that, we progressed through Kettleness Station and then onto Hinderwell Station. And around the Hinderwell area is the fascinating Mulgrave railway system, built to transport coal and involved a lengthy tunnel down to the sea. So beyond Kettleness Station came Staithes, and immediately to the west lay Staithes Viaduct, and that was 152 feet high and 790 feet long, and the trains were restricted across that to 20 miles an hour. In fact, interestingly, the wrought iron piers were filled with concrete to provide greater stability, complete with an anemometer to which sets bells ringing in the signal box if the wind speed became too high for the trains to cross safely. We then reached Pulby Potash Mine with its tall chimney providing a local landmark. From here, track was relaid around 1974, and the single line returns from here to Saltburn and pierces the facing hill through the 993-yard long Grinkle Tunnel and drops down to Loftus, where we must leave the line as we have crossed out of the current North Yorkshire area. As you may be aware, potash is now mined close to Horsecoe, and the rails were actually left there in situ until 1973 after closure, just in case the rail access were needed. And in fact, it wasn't in the end. So looking north of Whitby, we see Sandsend Station and the viaduct, and you're looking back towards Whitby, a little bit murky there. Some really lovely old cars in the station yard, and you're really looking down Lythe Bank and then towards the sea. This is Sandsend Station looking northwards. Again, you can just glimpse the camping coach to your left, and the train is about to embark on its trip round the cliffs and will soon disappear into Sandsend Tunnel to go through the cliffs that you see in the background. This is Sandsend Tunnel South Portal, fairly narrow tunnels. This is Sandsend Tunnel, the South Portal today, blocked off. People do still manage to get in, but it is, as I say, quite unstable, but still possible to see where it is. North of Sandsend Tunnel was Kettleness Tunnel, and here we're looking towards the southern portal of Kettleness Tunnel. It's a very short distance between the two tunnels, a matter of maybe 100 or 150 yards. This is an interesting image. This is Kettleness being actually built, the tunnel being built, and you can actually see the steam cranes built there, and the wood timbering and framing used to hold up the structure of the tunnel whilst the masonry was actually being installed, and the temporary construction line is there to the right. So the line went through Kettleness Tunnel to the left. This is Kettleness Station with a light engine. You're looking to the north there. Hinderwell Station, looking north. Staithes Station, and you're looking towards the viaduct. A few images of Staithes Viaduct here just to give you an impression of the height. So this is a short southbound train towards the end of the time when you had the railway service there, passenger service. This is a very old image, and it shows how high the viaduct was and the number of piers and support it had, and no corridors between those coaches. Once you're in a coach, you'll be stuck. This is a latter day image of Staithes Viaduct, and this is a train crossing through. You can almost see the bottom there, how deeply the viaduct goes down into the valley. This is by far the largest of any of the wrought iron viaducts. And this is a sad picture. This is the viaduct being demolished around about 1960. And it looks as though it's being demolished from north to south end. Here we have Bulby Mine, and the railway returns here. This is an aerial photograph, and you can see a train here, just where the cursor is, and the Bulby Mine chimney, and the complex there, and the North Sea beyond that. So this line exists for the transfer of potash. This is taken when the line was still open throughout to Whitby, and is the north end of Wrinkle Tunnel, which went through the hill between Bulby and Loftus. And this is a more modern image of a train, freight train at Wrinkle, locally known as Easington Tunnel. And finally in this part, we have a picture of a train arriving, a northbound train arriving from the Scarborough direction, and will be almost certainly heading towards Middlesbrough. And you can see it's just coming down a little bit of a slope into Loftus Station there. Now, we've already had a look at the tiled map of the North Eastern Railway. If you look at Whitby or Scarborough stations or some other stations around in the area, you'll find these lovely northeastern tiled maps. For those of you observant, you will spot an error in this tiled map, and perhaps you'd like to keep an eye out for whereabouts that error is. And they're most interesting to look at these maps. We've already had a look at the railways referred to on the tiled map. So where we are now, we've been up to Loftus, and we're going to come back to Seamer really, and then we'll head out along the Forge Valley line. So we'll progress onto the Forge Valley line, and then we will go to Malton, Driffield, and back to Scarborough. Seamer Station is 3 miles down the line towards York from Scarborough. Until the 3rd of June 1950, you could have then diverged right at Seamer West onto the Forge Valley line, having just passed the junction for the line to Filey and Hull, and along which we will return later. The line takes its name from the so-named station at Ayton at the south end of that curious geological phenomenon, the Forge Valley, through which the River Derwent appears to cut through the hills. This line was never profitable, with stations at not only Forge Valley, but Wykeham, Sword and Neviston, where there are modern camping coaches, and Thornton Dale before joining the line from Pickering to Rillington at Mill Lane Junction. And that had also been joined from the west by the line from Helmsley and Gilling into Pickering. They both then crossed into the A170 road to reach Pickering Station or Hungate on a level crossing which is no longer there. And the North Yorkshire Moors Railway history has been covered elsewhere, so we're actually going to turn around now, and then we'll head further south. So just some images of the Forge Valley line, and you can see there that the railway to Rillington is almost flat, crosses the ancient Lake of Pickering, and in the middle of which are located still the station buildings at Marish's Road, complete with an honesty box for refreshments for passing travellers. And at Rillington, the course curves westwards and joins the current York to Scarborough line and enters Malton across what must be one of the busiest level crossings in the area, as it is the meeting point of 3 important and busy roads. So if we look at Seamer, just a little section of the Ordnance Survey map, the solid black railway line indicates double track, and the single line in here indicates where the double track, which then becomes single track on the Forge Valley line, and is now turning west and then almost northwest to head towards Ayton. This is Seamer Station today, looking towards Scarborough. And this is Forge Valley Station at Ayton in its heyday, with some lovely station lamps, single track, and today still survives as I think North Yorkshire's highway depot. This is Wykeham Station, a little bit further along the line, and The platform survives and the station buildings do. They're part of the Wykeham estate. And there is also a weighbridge, which has been used, still in use as a building today. I can just make out there's a Lipton's advert for Lipton's tea there on the side, and a couple of station staff there. This is Sordon Station, Brompton Sordon Station, looking east. Sordon, we call it to distinguish it really from the other Brompton in North Yorkshire, which is near North Allerton. And this would be looking east towards Wykeham. As you can see, one or two people are posing in here. And this is Sordon Station today. All the stations on this line are well-preserved station buildings. They've all survived. This is Sneinton Station, which had the luxury of a passing loop with a train probably 1920s, 1930s, maybe even earlier. It looks from the picture there that we're probably looking at round about the Edwardian period. And Sneinton Station today. This is Eberston Station, which is really nearer to Alliston. And that's no trains, but it's actually plenty of weeds growing up near there. And Eberston carriages, which are actually at Alliston, these are luxury, modern equivalent of camping coaches, luxury accommodation. And if you wish to, you can actually stay there. Very, very popular, but quite costly. The next station, the last on the line, was Thornton Dale. And this section of the line was the last to survive because Thornton Dale had a quarry. And it was to the east of the station, so trains would trundle through and the locomotive crew would have to manually open and close gates in those latter days. Thornton Dale Station today, as it is, very well kept. This is the end of the Forge Valley line at the Pickering end, and we are looking southeast-ish here. This is after the closure of the Forge Valley line. The lines have been taken up, although one signal remains. And to the right is the Rillington line, which we're going to proceed down. That's the Pickering-Rillington line there. Pickering Station in pre-North Yorkshire Moors Railway days, looking north. And this is just about now where there is the head shunt, where the locomotives will come off their train and reverse and go back to head towards Gromont and Whitby. This is Marish's Station, right in the middle of nowhere, flat, and the rails go straight through that, almost flat, no gradient really. This is Rillington Station with a train approaching from the Scarborough end. The lines coming in from Pickering come in from the left, and you've got Rillington signal box there. And we then have a quick look at Rillington Station when it had an overall roof. This was dismantled, I believe, round about 1947. And then Rillington obviously no longer has a station at this stage, but it was remarkable which stations did have an overall roof over those there. Okay. This is Malton Station, and all trains have to call at the single line here. Locomotive is heading westwards, one of the newer Class 68 locomotives, which push and pull the newer passenger trains between Scarborough and Liverpool. This is Malton Station in past times. Sorry, not a very clear image, but it gives an indication of that there was an overall roof over the platform. In fact, there was the single line, there were two platforms, actually about two platforms with an overall roof, and that was removed because the roof became dangerous. And so we have the situation now where we just have the single line with modern coverings. This is Malton Scarborough Road Junction. If we were to reverse at Malton and then come off the Scarborough to York line, there was a connection to what was the Thirsk line to Thirsk, which was really the line to Thirsk and Malton and Driffield. The line to Thirsk is heading straight away from us, behind the train, and the connection to Malton Station is coming in from the left. Another view of Scarborough Road Junction in Malton. And here the line to Thirst goes under the arch. That is the line that's heading straight away with a very tall signal box so that the signalman could see over the bridge. There was an older signal box, but the view wasn't very good from it. The lines, 2 lines going to the left, go down to the present-day Malton Station. Now from Malton, we'd go in a southeasterly direction. We've just had a look at a few images of Scarborough Road Junction, and the line was part of the Thirsk, Malton and Driffield line, which was opened on the 19th of May, 1853, after many delays. Incidentally, if you look at the tiled NER maps, there is an error in the layout around Malton, so perhaps you'd like to spot that. The railway heading southeast climbed through North Grimston. It passed through Setrington as well, and past the medieval village of Warren Percy, just beyond which the Burdale Tunnel pierced the main ridge of the Wolds. The quoted length of this tunnel varies depending on the sources consulted, and is thought to be about 1,744 yards, or just under a mile, as the length required initially needs to be extended. After the line closed, and whilst it was still accessible, some archaeologists working at the Warren Percy medieval village site used to amuse themselves by driving into the tunnel from both ends and playing tiddlywinks by the beam of their car headlights at the end of a hard day's work on the medieval village. The origins of the passenger service's nickname, Malton Dodger, have been lost in the midst of time. The line descends past the abandoned Burdale Quarry in Burdale and the remote Burdale Station. The line flattens a little. The next station, Finborough and Sledmere, was noted for receiving distinguished royal guests to nearby Sledmere House, including King George VI and the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. On a practical level, it required a level crossing at either end, so it was rather difficult to balance road and rail traffic. Unfortunately, both were much slighter than they are now. There's a little section of the Yorkshire Wolds Railway, which is really the eastern end of the station, where you can now have little rides pulled by a diesel shunt, and you can actually drive the train as well. Beyond this, the terrain flattened out, and the stations from Finborough and Sledmere were in order: Wetwang and Garton Wold stations, both quite away from the villages they served. And finally, the line joined the Selby to Bridlington via Market Wheaton line at Driffield West Junction, which itself immediately joined the Hull to Scarborough line at Great Driffield. The passenger service from Malton to Driffield ended on the 3rd of June 1950, the same day as those on the Forge Valley, with goods surviving until 1958. The Hull to Bridlington line, which we then joined, was opened on the 3rd of October 1846 with a grand banquet in Bridlington. So if we have a look at some images here, the first station out of Malton heading southeast on the Wolds line was Setrington, and this would be looking toward, probably climbing up from Setrington towards the Wolds. And this is Setrington looking with a train looking towards Malton, I believe. This is North Grimston Station after closure, next station up the line, looking towards the Yorkshire Wolds. And this is North Grimston Station with a rail tour. Just up there, we have an image of the west end of Burdale Tunnel, and this is now completely tree covered. You can make your way to the tunnel entrance, which is bricked up, and it was close. The crossings, if you want to have a look at the Warren Percy medieval village, then the crossing is quite near to the tunnel entrance. This is the other end of Burdale Tunnel, sometimes referred to the east end or the Burdale end. Quite remote, probably an image taken after closure, but before it was bricked up. And Burdale Tunnel being bricked up in July 1961 to spoil the amusement of the, amongst others, the archaeologists playing tiddlywinks in the middle of the tunnel. This is Burdale Station, and the buildings still exist, but the station, the railway track course is still you can still make that out. And this is a view looking towards Finbar and Sledmere. If you were to go right from here, you go up towards Thixondale. This is just an image here. If you can see, this is the east end of Birddale Tunnel. Gives you quite a good idea of the terrain that the line needed to cut through and why a tunnel was required at this point. This is Finbar and Sledmere Station, looking to the west. This is the same view today, looking west. So the road just in front of you there is the road up towards Finbar from Sledmere. Wykeham Station, looking towards Driffield. And this is Wykeham Station, looking east. This is not a particularly good image, but it's just one of the rare images of Garton on the Wold Station. And then we come to Driffield West Junction, and the line coming in from the right was the line from Malton, and the line coming in from the left was the Driffield, it was the line from Market Wheaton and Selby towards to Driffield, and we then join the Hull to Bridlington line. Now we're heading back to Scarborough, and originally Bridlington was a terminus, and jumping from here and to just go directly to Bridlington, there are a number of stations on the line through that. No particular points to note really at this stage. There are very good books that you can read on the Hull to Bridlington line. I'll mention those in a few minutes. Bridlington was the end of the travel for a lot of tourists, and therefore, a bit like Scarborough, had quite a lot of terminus platforms, but it did, unlike Scarborough, have through platforms. It still boasts a fine array of semaphore signals, but for how long, we wonder. When you leave Bridlington Station, which was opened on the 20th of October 1847, we immediately cross Key Road and start climbing at 1 in 92 to cross the Flamborough Head Ridge. Near Sowerby, the line turns north and then northwest, and then reaches a summit not far from Speeton, where we return back to North Yorkshire. It was here that a northbound train of empty stock ran away on the 25th of August 1956, as the vacuum brake pipe had not been connected. And the driver then put the locomotive into reverse, sounded his whistle continuously as a warning. The train gathered speed as it ran through Hunmanby, and luckily an alert signal had the presence of mind to divert it into the Filey Camp line, which was opened in 1947 at the Royal Oak South Junction. That was part of a triangular junction to serve the Filey Camp line. The signal at the camp station stopped another train approaching from the north and limited the damage and avoided any injury by diverting the train into an empty platform where it came to rest after demolishing the buffer stops. The section from Hunmanby to Filey is still double track and still has jointed rails so that you can enjoy the diddle-dee-dee rhythm as the train travels between the two places. Filey retains the overall roof of the design used by the architect George Townsend Andrews. He designed a number of stations in the area, including Beverley Station and also Pocklington Station, which is on another disused line, but is used by the school, Pocklington School, as a gym for their students. The railway arrived in Filey on the 5th of October 1846. But the population grew only slowly from 1,231 inhabitants in 1841 to around 3,000 in 1901, and was around 7,000, but growing steadily now. In the 19th century, travellers were initially from the north of England to Filey, but surveys show that those staying in the town in the latter part of the 19th century include at least 17% from London and 12% from the home counties. It had become a true resort in both Victorian and Edwardian times, and the numbers increased there. The greatest increase of the trippers were from the day excursion trains because it was very accessible by train and continued to be, and really continuously until the end of the Filey Camp line in the 1970s. By contrast, the fish freight going out was very low, really, only 164 tonnes as compared with 7,797 tonnes from Scarborough recorded in 1901, partly because Filey had no harbour. The next station along the line is Gristhorpe, and although one of the platforms here is hidden by vegetation, both platforms remain as the whole line was double track, and this section was singled as part of rationalisation in the 70s and 80s. It's one of the few places to retain a gated crossing protected by semaphore signals operated from a small signal cavern, which is quite rare these days. It has links with the signal boxes at both Bridlington and Seymour. 3 miles further on, we join the York to Scarborough line just before reaching Seymour Station, a cold and chilly place with bus shelters in winter, as I only too well know. And finally, we cover the last 3 miles into Scarborough and pull up, hopefully, just short of the buffer stops under the train shed. Other trains deliver less fortunate passengers into the full open air. And then we really return to our starting point. So we'll just have a look at some images of the Filey to Scarborough section and from Brid. So this is Brid, leaving Brid Station at the north end and about to cross Key Road. Level crossings just in the distance. This is Bridlington Station through lines to Scarborough on the left, and the terminal platforms are on the right. This is Flamborough Station, the nearest station, I suppose, to Flamborough Head. This view would be looking towards Hunman Bay. And this is Flamborough Station today, looking downhill towards Bridlington with just single track. Bempton Station, still open today, and for those people interested in going to the Bempton RSPB Reserve, it's quite walkable, it's about 1¼ miles. Bempton Station looking towards Speeton. Speeton Station was really at the summit of the climb from Bridlington over towards Hunmanby, and it was from here that the train would have probably started to run away. Speeton Station looking towards Hunmanby. Hunmanby Station itself, where there is the beginning of the double track section to Filey, so this is a view looking south. The Filey Camp line, which was opened on the 10th of May 1947, and this was taken in its last year of use. A better image here of Filey Camp Station towards the end of the time it was being used. Now, the station was actually on the west of the A165 Scarborough Bridlington Road, and passengers getting off had to then go on a subway under the road to get to the Filey Camp, which lay to the east of the road there. This is another view of Hunmanby Station. Filey Station with its roof, it's Andrew's roof, and this view is looking towards Scarborough. This is Gristhorpe Station, no longer in use, but the platform and buildings perfectly well preserved. We take another view there. That is the signal cabin from Gristhorpe level crossing, with a train approaching from the Filey direction, and a nice little small box there. This is a train which was leaving Seymour and was taking the junction to Filey. And it would almost certainly be an excursion train heading from goodness knows where, northeast, Glasgow, Newcastle maybe, and would reverse in Scarborough and then head towards Filey, where it would drop its passengers, or prior to 1977 might actually run into the camp line. This is Seymour Station looking towards Filey, where the line would turn off left in the distance. You can see the Wolds beyond there, and the line straight on would go to York. And the old and the new at Scarborough Station. To the left, we have one of the conventional diesel one multiple unit Class 185 trains, which are giving way slowly to the so-called Nova 3 trains with a locomotive at one end and what's called a driving trailer at the other, where the there is a driving cabin and the controls for the train can be operated from either end. And this view is looking towards the trains heading towards York. And here we are at almost the end of our journey. These are the buffer stops at Scarborough and the covered part of the station. So if it's a rainy day, you'll be protected from the rain. And finally, the Whitby's rail tour of the 6th of March 1965, which is seen here crossing the River Esk on Larpool Viaduct to Whitby, essentially marked the end of all the lines covered and the end of both passenger and goods services. It was the end of the passenger service from Scarborough to Whitby. It was also the day on which the British Rail Whitby to Pickering service ended, and it was also by then the end of the World's Line, which had closed sometime earlier. Okay, if you're interested in any of the railways that we've talked about, I'll suggest some reading on the final slide. Just before I do, just to point out with the cursor that the link between Whitby Town up to Whitby Westcliff goes under the one of the arches to the right here where my cursor is, and you can just see a train disappearing along the Esk Valley heading towards Russup, which would be its next stop. I hope you've enjoyed the talk today, and I've just suggested some further reading if you are interested. These just include some books which you might want to have a look at. Very good series of books about railways right across Yorkshire, including Railways Around Whitby 1 and 2 by Martin Bairstow, Malton Driffield Junction Railway by Warwick Burton, and a very comprehensive history of the Hull and Scarborough line by John Adderman and Bill Fawcett. Not forgetting The Railways of Rydale by Patrick Howard, and local author Robin Lidster, who's written many books on railways and other topics, including Scarborough to Whitby Railway, a centenary volume. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the other talks in the series.